Good evening, everybody, and if you can watch this live tonight, it's great to have you here. If you can't, you know that you're probably catching up watching this as a recorded video. And I also record these onto my YouTube channel, and you can also catch this, quite a few of these as podcasts on my website. My website's called Peyton Principles. So welcome tonight, and I've decided tonight to focus on the impact of cortisol, stress and cortisol on various aspects of our health, on so many aspects of our health. And the reason why I've chosen this tonight is because it's Stress Awareness Month. It's currently April the 13th if you're watching this at another time, and it is Stress Awareness Month. And this was really brought about to talk about the causes of stress and potential ways to resolve and reduce stress in our lives. And I've spoken a lot about this on other lives and videos that I've done. But tonight I really wanted to highlight the impact that raised cortisol in particular can have on our health in so many ways that I put in the heading. And when I promoted this for tonight, and I mentioned quite a lot of ways, and I just really wanted to go through some of this information so that you're just more aware of how raised stress, raised cortisol, how it impacts on our health. So if you're going through a particularly stressful time, or maybe you're not really that conscious that stress is doing anything to your body and to your health, you may start to find some sort of niggling symptoms, and you may then begin to sort of relate it back possibly to some of the stress that you may have been experiencing, and more prolonged stress in particular is what we're talking about here. And then you can start to think about ways that you can start to focus on reducing your stress. So cortisol is one of the two major hormones released when we're stressed. We've heard of adrenaline. That's the one that's released instantly. There's an instant reaction with the release of adrenaline, and cortisol comes along pretty quickly, but it follows on just marginally slower in its release. And they're both there at times of danger, you know, when the body perceives danger, when it perceives stress, but it can't differentiate between the types of danger it may find itself in. When it perceives that, it's going to release these hormones. And cortisol is the one that tends to hang around for longer. So when we experience more prolonged stress, or there may be lots of different types of stress in our life, and it doesn't seem to sort of go away very quickly. And, you know, certainly what we've been living through in these COVID times in the last 12 months, we are all, a lot of us are sort of feeling this, you know, this sort of undercurrent of a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of stress, a lot or a little. And so this cortisol could be sort of rumbling along in the background without us realizing it. Now, cortisol gets us out of danger. So when we've got the stress response, which is known as the sympathetic nervous system, it gets us out of danger. So it's absolutely fantastic. It does its job really, really well. It's going to trigger the release of glucose from our glycogen stores. It's going to start making our heart pump faster and our lungs work harder. And it's going to narrow our blood vessels to get, you know, to get the oxygen pumping around, to get the glucose to the cells, because we need that instant energy for our muscles to get us out of danger, to make us alert, to give brain our energy so it can fire on all cylinders and make us really aware of what's going on. Fantastic. It does its job really, really well. But if you can imagine that some of these things are beginning to happen when we don't need them to happen, when we don't need to get out of danger, out of a dangerous situation. So the sympathetic nervous system and the stress response is supposed to be very short-lived. We're supposed to fire up the sympathetic nervous system, get us out of danger, and then the parasympathetic, it's this parallel arm of the autonomic nervous system that then kicks in, and it tells the body we can start to calm down now, and it takes us out of this fight or flight reaction into what is commonly known as rest and digest. And of course the problems start to arise when the body seems to keep going with raised cortisol, and there's this underlying anxiety and stress that's going on, and stress and cortisol is raised, so we don't really get out of this fight or flight stress response and into the parasympathetic. And this is where the problems can start to occur. I should also say that cortisol actually is not just linked to the stress response. So that's when it sort of pumps out a lot. But we should always have a small amount of cortisol. In fact, we should have raised cortisol first thing in the morning. It raises in line, or should raise in line with what we call our natural circadian rhythms. So first thing in the morning, our cortisol level should be high, and it helps to get us going in the morning. It gets us out of bed. It fires us up for the day. And as the day goes on, cortisol levels should start to decline. In fact, it's very high and it falls quite rapidly by lunchtime, and then it falls slowly and levels off and drops away towards the end of the day, so that by the time you go to bed it should be low. And I'll come on and talk about how imbalanced patterns of cortisol affect our sleep. So it starts to build up in the early hours of the morning, gets really high, gets us out of bed in the morning in line with our natural circadian rhythms, and then should fall off. And it is involved in metabolizing our food that we eat to create energy. So we always need a little bit. It's when there's too much in the system that it starts to cause a problem and become damaging to health. And cortisol long term is what I call catabolic. It's breaking things down rather than building up and repairing the body. It's having a damaging, breaking things down effect on the body. So first and foremost, some of these are what I call less damaging to health, but they are a problem for a lot of us. So first of all, it can encourage weight gain, cortisol, and it will encourage weight gain predominantly around the middle. This is linked to two things. One, because of its impact on raising glucose in the bloodstream. I said at the start, when we've got a stress response, then we're going to get glucose from our glycogen stores released into the bloodstream. Well, if that's happening a lot, we've got too much glucose in the bloodstream, the body's got to try and utilize it. And if it doesn't need it for energy, it's going to then try and store it. And rather than always putting it back as a glycogen store, it can start to store it around our middle. It'll convert it to fat and store it. And there seems to be a lot of cortisol receptors around our abdomen. So what we can find is that fat deposits get laid down around our middle. And you will find, what I think I see and notice, that people who seem to be quite fit and they do a lot of exercise, but they're still carrying weight around the middle. It's not because they need to exercise even harder. I think a lot of this, I don't know about their diet, but I think a lot of this can be due to more of the stress response, the type of exercise they're doing, and it's encouraging fat storage around the middle and around the abdomen. So weight gain, particularly around the abdomen, is problematic for a lot of people, and we don't want it there. It's not good for metabolic health overall. We know apple-shaped people, it's not healthy for us. Pear-shaped people are healthier than apple-shaped people. It lowers collagen production. So raised cortisol, as I said, it's catabolic. It will break down collagen. It won't help to make collagen. Well, collagen, we know, is really important as we get older to keep our skin, don't look at me at the moment, but to keep our skin looking younger, to keep the cells plumped up. And we know we lose some of that as we get older. But collagen's not just to do with the skin and our outward appearance. It's needed for tendons and ligaments. It's needed for bones. We need a lot of collagen for our bones. So as we get older again, it's really important for keeping bones strong that we've got good collagen production, and cortisol isn't going to help with that. It can slow repair to injury. So if we're getting a lot of injuries and our repair is slow from injury, it may be a little bit of that could be down to higher cortisol levels in the body. It can really drain our skin and leave us looking really pale. When you're really stressed, if you look at yourself when you're going through a stressful time compared to when you're not, you can really sort of look quite sort of wan and pale. It draws the blood away from the extremities because, as I said, it's needed to pump blood oxygen and nutrients around the body for that fight or flight reaction. So it drains it away, the blood away from our skin, and it can just leave us. I've got my do not disturb on, but a call tried to come in. It just leaves us looking very tired and doesn't make us look particularly healthy. As I said, some of these are less sort of what I call health damaging compared to others. But, you know, when we're trying to look and feel our best, it's not going to be helpful from that perspective. Now, but certainly from a health point of view, it's not good from a cardiovascular disease and blood pressure. So all that sort of rapid pumping of blood around the body, it's going to constrict our arteries to do that. And over time, if it's going on for a prolonged period of time, it's going to be a contributory factor in raising blood pressure, and it can put pressure on the arteries. So long-term cardiovascular disease, heart disease, high blood pressure, it's not good for those, and it's going to be a factor in that. So, you know, we talk about stress, but it doesn't really explain what that means. It's the cortisol that is contributing to that. Blood sugar imbalance, I talked about that from a weight point of view. So raised cortisol, it's going to encourage the conversion of glycogen to glucose. So when the glucose enters the bloodstream in large amounts, it raises our glucose levels up too high. And in response to that, we're going to get greater amounts of insulin trying to utilize that glucose. And when we've got an imbalance of insulin, glucose, insulin, blood glucose levels drops, then leaves us feeling tired. It can then, you know, it just affects our mood and concentration. You know, we want to try and keep our blood glucose level on an even keel as much as we possibly can. And that in itself can be a yo-yo effect, because if blood sugar levels imbalance from what we're eating, that in turn creates a stress response. So it can be a bit of a sort of double-edged sword, that one, and a bit of a vicious circle. But we want to do what we can to lower the stress response to try and help towards keeping our blood glucose level on a more even keel. That's really, really important. It will impact our sleep patterns. So when I mentioned about our circadian rhythm and that cortisol should start to rise in the early hours in the morning, when we wake up 7 o'clock or so in the morning, it should be at its highest. It drops rapidly by lunchtime and gradually drops away until it's sort of time to go to bed. Now, when we're under prolonged stress, it really upsets this balance of cortisol, and it starts to do funny things in the body. And we find that that pattern of cortisol is all out of whack. I mean, over a very prolonged period of time, it can sort of drop away to very low levels, which is obviously isn't helpful and can leave us feeling sort of chronically fatigued. But if it's having a sort of more subtle effect than that, what you can find is that it's going to have an impact on getting up in the morning. We can wake up feeling very, very tired, and because the cortisol is just not high enough. But equally, what can happen is cortisol can be too high when we want to go to bed. And that has a massive impact on our ability to go to sleep. Some people find they just can't switch off in an evening. They get a second wind and they start getting on their computers and doing things, and they don't switch off till perhaps 1 o'clock in the morning, possibly even later. And then they need to get up the next day and they're just feeling really tired. So this pattern of cortisol, the natural circadian pattern of cortisol, can become out of balance. And so instead of being high in the morning, low at night, it can be too low in the morning and it can be too high at night. And that really affects our sleep. And if our blood sugar levels get imbalanced as well, and they drop in the middle of the night, it can make us wake up in the middle of the night, create another stress response in the night, and have us pinged wide awake when we just don't want to be. So it's another problem in terms of our sleep. You can't get to sleep, you can't wake up, it might wake you in the night, you can't get back to sleep. Cortisol has that impact. Keeping blood sugar levels is really important. They really play off each other very much here. You know, cortisol affecting blood sugar, but keeping blood sugar level balanced is one way to lower the stress response and lower cortisol. Female hormones, you know, those that are suffering from PMS, those that are going through the menopause, raised cortisol really does play havoc with female hormones. It has a big problem with this. It upsets the balance. I mentioned about the cortisol, it raises insulin, it can raise estrogen, and it can lower progesterone. And we just get this like real imbalance going on. The body just doesn't know where it is. It's because cortisol is a steroid hormone, it can send the production from a precursor called pregnenolone down the wrong pathway and use it to make cortisol and interfere with its production of testosterone and progesterone. And we need to keep these very closely in balance later on. Well, through all our life, but for different reasons at different points in our hormonal life. So it really does play havoc with that. And it can take time to really get this back into balance. And, for those going through the menopause and for those getting more extreme symptoms, I would very much want to look at stress levels, how we can try and calm the stress response and rebalance blood sugar, insulin levels, cortisol. It brings the thyroid into play as well. Digestion. Now, when we're stressed, I mentioned at the start, the sympathetic and the fight or flight response, and the opposite, the parasympathetic, is known as rest and digest for very good reasons. So when we're stressed and we need to respond to this danger signal and be prepared to fight or flight, the digestive function is non-essential at that point in time. We don't need to be digesting food when we're in danger. And so what it does is it draws blood away from the digestive organs. It takes away the key nutrients from it. It impairs the digestive function completely. It will hinder digestive secretions so that we can't digest our food well when we're feeling uptight and stressed. So there's a lot of things we can do, and I encourage clients to do, to really try and calm everything down when we're trying to eat our meals. But it's really important to notice, and they do go hand in hand, and clients often notice that when stress is greater, it really has an impact, and more noticeable impact, on digestive symptoms, whether it's bloating and wind and burping and indigestion and acid reflux. And I've spoken about this a lot before, but acid reflux very often doesn't mean too much acid. It can often mean not enough acid in the stomach to digest the meal. And of course, as the stress is going to impact not only the breakdown of food, but also towards this imbalance of this very delicate balance of our microbiome and the gut bacteria, creating dysbiosis, and leading on from that, it can lead to this thing towards leaky gut because of toxins and gases that are given off by the wrong bacteria. So you've got this massive sort of domino knock-on effect from stress, poor digestion, all the symptoms associated, poor microbiome, dysbiosis, balance, creating leaky gut, and leaky gut then can lead to all sorts of other symptoms happening throughout the body. So, digestion is directly impacted when we are stressed, and anything you can do to sit at a table and calm that down, do some deep breathing. Sun's just come out, might have affected the light a little bit where I'm sitting. So you need to look at that as well. And just two final things is with regards to immunity. So immune system is going to be suppressed, just like digestion is. Production of white blood cells and looking after our immune system is not essential when we're in danger. So that's also suppressed when we're stressed, and will come back into balance and be supportive of white blood cell production when we're not in the stress response, when we're in the parasympathetic rest and digest. So it's seen as non-essential, the immune system. It's suppressed. It will suppress the production of white blood cells. And I think this in turn can also longer term have an impact on potentially autoimmune conditions. And we know that long term cortisol is pro-inflammatory. So short term it's anti-inflammatory, but over a prolonged period of time it becomes pro-inflammatory. And it's sort of what I call create this inflammatory fire. It's firing away, possibly at a low level, throughout the body. Not in such a huge amount, but it's just firing this inflammatory fire all the time, burning away. that we just don't need and is damaging to our cells. So that's an overview of just why cortisol is damaging to our health. I could go into a lot more detail, but that's not the purpose of these sessions. Now, I haven't got time to talk about how we calm the stress response. My live that I did on the 2nd of March was all tools and techniques to calm anxiety, but anxiety and stress is all the same sort of tools and techniques that you can use. And that was on the 2nd of March, and it will be in my YouTube channel. I've noticed it's not on my podcast, on my website, Peyton Principles, but I will make sure that one does get uploaded because I think it's a really important podcast for people to be aware of. So thank you for your time again today. I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday. And this Friday, my live, which is my sort of weekly update and roundup of nutrition in the news, I'm going to do a little bit early in the day at about 9 o'clock in the morning rather than 1 o'clock. So I look forward to catching up with you then if you can watch it. Thank you for being part of my community, for those of you who are watching it in my closed Facebook group. For others, please come and join it if you're watching this in one of my other places. And thanks. Have a lovely week. Have a great evening. Bye.